Hey, welcome everyone. I'm JP.
And I'm Peter.
We are the Pinedo Brothers filmmakers. We're Catholic artists working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through telling stories about faith, not these faith films.
Yes, and welcome everyone.
Yeah, we've got
with us.
Thank you for joining us. Yes, we've got a lot to get through today. Today we're talking about a film that you and I watched actually for my bachelor party. Mm-hmm. One of the last things that was done before COVID hit down.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it was a good night.
And it has an iconic scene that will really bring out the topic that we're talking about, which is beauty. Beauty, the heritage of the West, and how the art that we're experiencing now seems to have deviated from that heritage, and kind of diving into a little bit about what beauty is. Anyway, without any further ado, shall we get started, Pete?
Let's go ahead and get started.
Great. So this is not meant to be an exhaustive list or an exhaustive treatise on the different ideas of beauty. For that, I suggest a book, Aesthetics by Dietrich von Hildebrand, a great Catholic philosopher that was born in Germany just as, well, he wasn't born just as, but he was growing up and blossoming into his own as a philosopher right as the Nazis were taking power. And of course...
That's rough.
Yeah, definitely makes for a bad milieu to be growing your career as a Catholic philosopher, as Nazi Germany is growing. In any case, he very aptly destroys every type of philosophical tenet that the Nazis have, and of course they hate him, and so he has to leave and runs to Italy. And it's just his wife and his child, they have one harrowing adventure after another as the Nazis just take over more and more of Europe until he finally makes it to Brazil, and then from Brazil up to America. But his life is a movie on its own, but we're not talking about his life, we're talking about a lot of his thoughts here. I highly recommend the book. We'll be reading sections of it. But before we start reading sections, the first thing I wanted to talk about was the idea of how the human person has an innate longing for beauty. This is something that we know from our own experience, but it's actually been studied in stories, in psychological blind tests, or by psychologists who would show pictures that adults had rated of beautiful people, men or women, and these pictures, they would then show them to 4, 6, 8-month-old babies. And the babies would look longer at the pictures that had been rated as beautiful by the adults.
Really?
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah, and this has been a test that's been replicated. If you want to check it out, apapsych.net is where I was looking at this test, and there were several others on there. This is just me doing a little bit of research on my my few minutes I had on my lunch break, but I've heard about these tests. They're out there. The point is, we as humans have an innate longing to see what is beautiful, and we recognize it. We recognize that which is objectively beautiful, even in the cradle, even as babies, when we don't understand or barely recognize our own parents. we still recognize that one picture is more of a person is more beautiful than another person. Which, yes, it destroys a lot of this beauty culture that's going around.
That's So what you're saying is that you hate people who aren't classically attractive. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the human form, the human person, has beauty within it. And there's objective criteria for what that beauty is. Now, if you want to go into what that objective criteria is, check out von Hildebrand's book on aesthetics. He talks about that. But the point we're making here is, even as babies, we desire this. This is something that we recognize and long for. And it's not just in the human form, but also within the natural world. Think about it. Why do you think so many people move to Los Angeles?
Because they hate themselves.
That's possible. Any other reasons?
No, because it naturally is a very beautiful area with the beaches and the mountains in north of Los Angeles. So it definitely has a lot going for it in the natural form.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was a tiny little outpost that it doesn't have any claim to water even. You know, it somehow has managed to survive and thrive and grow beautiful because it's a mecca for artists. Artists came there from New York because Edison owned the patents on film, on film cameras. And so Thomas Edison would send around his goons to anybody that was trying to make a film, all around the New York, the New England area, and was destroying anybody's attempts to make a film besides something that he was in charge of. He thought he owned that medium. And so everyone started fleeing. All the other artists that were not Thomas Edison started fleeing, trying to get as far away from him as he could. And there's this gorgeous oasis that was tiny, shouldn't really exist except for an old Spanish mission or two that are gorgeous, by the way, but we're not talking about Spanish missions. And these artists were so enthralled by the beauty of this land, of what they were seeing, and there are other reasons as well, I'm sure, but the natural beauty there called to them. It spoke to them. And there's so many other examples of this. Think about all the vacation spots that we head to: Jamaica, Bermuda, Hawaii, even places of not great natural beauty, but that man has added to, have become we're like moths to the light, running towards beauty in one way or another. It's amazing. I don't know how to really explain it beyond we all know it.
Yeah, that's the thing right there. We all know it, no matter what culture or background, no matter what way we were raised. Something that we all share in common is that drive to see the natural world in its beauty, which I think is very interesting, because like if you go to a forest and maybe they have like giant pine trees or something like that, you'll see people stop and look up and just be looking awestruck at it for a while, and you do the same thing. So it's something in human nature that's just really drawn to that, and it's almost its own type of pilgrimage. It's that attraction to the beauty.
It is a pilgrimage. How many times have you heard religious people say, "Oh, this cathedral, this forest, that's a cathedral"? I've heard it many times. Maybe it's because I wander around with non-religious people that somehow realize the spiritual need that we have, the inert longing that we have for beauty, and they fill it with the Sequoia Fort National Park or Big Ben or whatever type of mecca for natural beauty is that's out there. We find it like a moth to the light, and we don't just find it though. We also build it.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking about some cathedrals and stuff like that?
I'm talking. The cathedrals are a part of it. I'm just talking about art in general. Mm-hmm. Man has this unique ability to not just recognize beauty, but actually add to it. To not just add to it, but co-create to bring something into existence that is beautiful that didn't exist beforehand. I want to, for talking about art and beauty, I actually wanted to bring up a little bit of Hildebrand here. And this is towards the end of this book. It's a dense book, but I recommend it if you have a chance. The beauty of the second power in art, which we shall study in the second volume of this work, has various effects on us. It seizes us, enchants us, moves us, elevates us, and makes us happy. It broadens our spirit and enriches it. It draws us into the depths of our being. It relaxes us, although it also generates in us a tension in the highest sense of the term. However, there is an additional special element in art that goes beyond enjoyment. True artists disclose to us the beauty of nature and life in a deep way. Without their help, this would not be accessible to us in such depth. No doubt, there are particularly alert persons who apprehend life and nature in their profound beauty, even though they themselves are not artists. In general, however, it is certainly correct, as was emphasized especially by Conrad Fiedler, to say that art has the significant pedagogical mission of opening our eyes to the treasures of beauty which life and nature possess. Hugo Homstall speaks of this in beautiful words. For that, I believe, is what artists are for, so that all those things that pass through their inner life receive a meaning and a soul. Nature wanted to know what she looked like, and so she created Goethe for herself. And Goethe's soul reflected thousands of things and redeemed them into life. And then there are artists who are much smaller mirrors, like narrow, still wells in which only one single star twinkles. They poured the enamel of their soul around one single thing and immersed one single feeling in beauty. Such it was Eckendorff, who revealed the longing, searching, and the enigmatic resting of the breathing night when the fountains burble. And Lenau heard the reeds speaking and gave a name to the beauty of the heath. And many clouds, heavy golden clusters, received their soul from Poussin, while many rosy round clouds received their soul from Rubens. And there are emotions in our soul that Schumann created. And there are thoughts that would never have come to us without Hamlet. And many of our wishes have the colors from a forgotten painting and a fragrance of a song that has passed away.
That is also a form, I think, of constructing beautiful things. Just he's describing other people's beautiful things.
It is gorgeous. It absolutely is gorgeous. And that keys up an idea that we'll be coming back to, which is we as artists influence the imagination. You know, we influence not just how someone sees the world and their present state, how they feel now, but how they're able to actually process and think about any future problem that's coming. Because an experience with beauty actually changes. It's like a fire that starts to permanently mark the soul of the person, and their experience from every situation from then on is changed. And an example of this in film is what I was hoping to talk about today, in 1917. It's a pretty gory film, actually. It's a little bit at times rough to watch for those that might be squeamish. But there's one scene in particular where the main character is running through basically a no man's land. And even though it's a completely desolate moment, because he's at a very low spot, you find beauty within it. And it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. Maybe would you be open to playing that scene there, Pete?
Yeah, I want to see it.
And we're back.
Wow. Really, really love that scene. It just really leaves this really lasting impression, which is interesting because it is a very like chaotic and violent scene, which, you know, the entire movie is kind of that way, but it leaves you with this kind of almost haunting sense of beauty in some way. So why do you bring this scene up in particular? What struck you?
Well, the reason why, there's two different questions there. The reason why did I bring it up in particular, and then what struck me. The first question that you asked, why did I bring it up in particular? I see that this scene as the current apex of one of the great cinematographers of all time, Roger Deakins, who shot that film. And obviously the director, Sam Mendes, should get a lot of credit for that as well. I mean, the symbolism of that scene, which the director is the sole, he's the sole captain of the symbolism of the pieces. He littered that scene in particular, and the whole movie, but that scene in particular, with all sorts of symbolism we could spend 30 minutes going over. But we're just talking purely about the aesthetic beauty that's within it. And Deakins is a master of photographing that, of capturing that on celluloid and then displaying it.
And Deakins is the cinematographer.
Yes.
Right? Yeah, just for anyone who didn't know.
He's the cinematographer of that film, and he's a laundry list of different, maybe could you pull him up on IMDb? A laundry list of different classic films out there, like Assassination of Jesse James, one of my all-time favorites as far as just gorgeous colors and composition and framing. Blade Runner, also another good one. I believe you've seen that one.
Mm-hmm. That's a good-looking film.
Yeah. He's really quite extraordinary in what he's able to accomplish. And this film, the 1917, this scene in particular that we watched, he's able to capture the beauty, the sadness, the sorrow, the epic proportions of that time in this little 6-minute scene, which the minutes for me when I watch it, they just run away.
Oh yeah, it doesn't feel like 6 minutes. It feels like less than a minute. When I first watched it, I had no idea that scene was that long. I was shocked when you said it was 6 minutes, because it's one of those things that it is a time warp, you know? It's something that just connects with you so much that you have you lose connection with your sense of time and space. You're just engrossed into this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's something that great films, great art, that's one of the characteristics of great art, that you just lose yourself. You forget, you lose the sense of time and place, and that's what they managed to do. There's so many things that I could say about that, but what I wanted to really focus on, I know that we weren't going to bring up too much symbolism, but the symbolism there of that burning church, and the church, the idea that this is where the 20th century is heading us, where Nietzsche says you kill God, and then you see this is what killing God leads you, like that the burning of the West, the burning of the heritage of the West. But I wanted to would you like to comment on that real quick?
I mean, yeah, those are the things also I didn't really notice too much when I first watched it, because I think independent of the symbolism, it still speaks to you, even if you're not realizing the deeper meanings. And I think that's what really good films will speak to people, even if they're not really sure consciously of what is being spoken to them through. And there's a difference in my mind between like those films that are just like, you know, artsy and trying to like send some kind of message and speak to people, and then that is different from something like this, where they're not really saying things, they're telling a story that speaks to the human person as a person. conveying the symbolism, but also the imagery and the emotion. The music, the score is incredible there too. That's a great example of just all the different aspects of film coming together to do something beautiful. I see that Roger Deakins, he's an English cinematographer, which is interesting because, I mean, it was the English army there that they were.
I didn't even. I knew that at one point, but I'd forgotten.
Yeah, so I wonder if he really connected with that very well, as maybe if he had any, like a grandfather or something like that who fought in World War I.
I wouldn't be surprised. Most English of ancestors that have fought in the Great Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Another aspect of great filmmaking, though, is the ability to capture, to have sense of space and sense of grandeur within the space. I remember when I was in film school, and one of our professors, who I loved quite a bit, Micah Barber, who was a great filmmaker in his own right, he was explaining to us little filmmakers who didn't know anything, think about where you're going to be filming. Think about what is going to be captured within your frame. Where are you? And then he waved his hands. He said, "Look, where are we now? Think about what we are representing by the space that we're in." And that leads me to Chartres Cathedral in just north of Paris in France. You walk into this cathedral and it's you are overpowered with a sense of awe of something that is greater. And I jumped a little bit too far ahead of ourselves there, but the great church spaces. What are some of the great church spaces that you've been in, Peter?
So I mean, probably, obviously, the best thing and most incredible churches that I've ever been in have been in Europe. Which, Toledo in Spain. I remember they had a really incredible cathedral that we visited there. I don't remember what it was called. And then just other churches there in Spain and Portugal, absolutely beautiful. There are some quite beautiful churches here in the United States as well. They're a little less common because most of the churches are a lot newer. They don't really make churches like that anymore. But in the United States, we do have some of them too as well. In D.C., there's the absolutely beautiful National Shrine of something or another, I think it's called. Mm-hmm. And there's some beautiful churches here in Texas too, San Antonio, San Fernando Cathedral, and different churches like that. So yeah, it really speaks to the human person as well. I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, when you step into these spaces, when we're talking, the connection that I failed to make earlier is we as humans not just long for beauty, but we also long for the sense of the sacred that is able to be experienced oftentimes in an experience with beauty, in contact with beauty. And you sense that sacredness in the scene of 1917. You sense there is something that is supernatural we're watching, we're witnessing this interplay. And if you step into these great churches, like what you mentioned in DC or in what I mentioned at Chartres Cathedral, there is a sense of grandeur in it that it's grandeur is not the right word. There's something that goes beyond what is natural. There is a supernatural within it. Chartres Cathedral is probably the most popular example, or the most apt example of something that inspires awe and wonder at the beauty that you see within it. Construction started in 1145 and it completed in 1220. That's 75 years in the High Middle Ages, meaning
it's like 2 lifetimes.
Yeah, the average age was 33. There's 33 years.
Literally 2 lifetimes. Yeah.
So people that started building it knew that they weren't going to finish it. They knew that they would not be able to see that which they are going to complete, and they also knew their children weren't going to be able to complete it probably. Now there were people that lived long in that time. There was some people, some of the children did get to see it, but by and large they weren't going to. So they weren't building for their own glory. They weren't building this church for their own enjoyment later on. This is something that they were never going to see the fruits of. And yet, people of the Middle Ages, and it wasn't just Chartres. Chartres the best example of it. But like you said, in the first cathedral, we went into one in Spain together, and that's one of the first ones that I saw where you experience the wonder and awe of a supernatural beauty. Every single little town in Europe in the High Middle Ages was building a cathedral. And the High Middle Ages, by that I mean around the 1200s. They were not rich. This was not built, and it was not enriching the church. The church is not going to be richer because they have a better place for the people to worship. The priests do not live higher on the hog because the poor peasants can come in and worship in a magnificent cathedral. So the idea that this is just something that was constructed so that the clerics could live better doesn't have any sense in reality. This was something that was very consciously worked on in efforts to create a space that was fitting for the creator of the universe. Mm-hmm. And obviously fitting is far beyond what they hoped to do. Something that was more fitting.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's something that is really difficult to understand as people living in the 21st century. The level of like Christocentrism in the Middle Ages, and that how the entire society was built around Christianity. It's hard to understand as living in the 21st century in the United States, where it's built on good foundations, but very different. But the people had Christ in the center of their society, and that's what it was, and that was illustrated and it was embodied in the physical realm as well, with the churches being in the center of every village and city, and it rising far above everything else, and them just pouring their entire selves into it. I think a really cool example I just randomly thought of, one of the churches I forgot to mention, the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City. That's another massive, very beautiful church, and it was funny. It's funny, and I think difficult for people to understand today. But once Cortez, conquered the Aztecs, the first thing they did was build this incredibly huge cathedral. And what they did, they built it in the middle of the city and right on top of the Aztec temple, which we're not talking about colonialism and things like that right now, but that just really conveys their sense of where their priorities were and what they considered the most important. And here they are establishing a brand new, realm here in Mexico, and their first thing is to build this huge church.
And I love what you said about it gives the idea of where the priorities are. I thought at first when I was thinking about making this argument, making this point, we get to the point, okay, so we've gone through 8 centuries now of just incredible art, incredible church building, incredible sacred music, and then we hit the middle of the 20th century. And what happens? Like when 1960 rolls around, what happens? Like what? I went to a church this morning. We went to Mass this morning, and I received God in the Eucharist. So I have no reason to complain, and I don't mean this as a complaint. And I thought at first I would bring up the picture of what this church looked like, but I think I can describe it just as well. It's ugly. It's just a room. It's a big room that's an auditorium that's shapeless and has no sense of form. or function. Like, let's bring up the Chartres Cathedral. Like, cycle through some of these pictures. Okay, so real quickly, the spire here, the first one, the one on the right that you're seeing there was built first.
This one?
Yes, and it's more of a older style, older Gothic style, and then it took them so long to build it. On the left side, they had increased their technology, and they said, well, we can do better than that. And that's the idea here. You're constantly trying to do better with whatever means at your disposal. You're like, what can I do that's better? How can I improve? This is important. This is worth improving. Can you cycle through?
Mm-hmm. Doesn't look like it's moving.
Oh, it's okay. Don't worry. Maybe it's better that we don't do it. What I see today with the churches that were built starting in the 50s and the 60s is a complete opposite of that. It's not how can we do better, and it's not because we have less money now. We have so much more money than these guys. There's no comparison. Absolutely zero comparison to what we are working with and what they had at their disposal. Our technology, our money is better. So what happened? That's the question. Why are we bereft of this heritage of the West?
Yeah, I really think there's a lot of things. It's interesting that you wanted to bring that up, because I've actually been attending this group of Catholic men when we've been discussing ideas in how philosophers from hundreds of years ago have each contributed building blocks to get to the kind of society that we live in today, where a lot of social action that people take is unconsciously founded on kind of Marxist ideas and ideas that kind of, I think most people don't realize, but actually subvert culture and society. Mm-hmm. And I think that it really funny that we were just discussing 1917, because a lot of that's, First World War, things start going pretty crazy. Like that I think the entire Western culture just was completely shocked. They had never seen war and carnage and destruction on that level before, and I think that really shook the foundations of Western identity, and you really saw it in art as well. Immediately after the World War ended, the art was, a lot of it was very disturbed. Like if you can look, I can't think off the top of my head of the artist's name, but I know there's a couple of artists that I'm thinking of their work where they portray the brutality and the savagery of what they underwent and went through in World War I. And you can tell that they're completely horrified and they don't know what to make of it. And so I think, it's a lot of things that really that were stepping stones and building blocks to where we are for today. But I would say also a big part would be the Enlightenment thinkers. They were one of the major ones where they started rejecting the idea of God and rejecting the idea of putting Christ the center of your culture and society, and that leaves you reeling with a sense of like, where do we go from here? You can reject the church and you can reject God, but now what are you going to make the center of your culture and your city? And I don't think we knew what to do as a society. We didn't know what to make the center, and so now we have that's where we get these shapeless buildings, and these formless structures where there's just no center and there's no order because we've rejected God. So now we have nothing to structure our society on.
Art is a reflection of it's just like Dietrich said earlier. Art is a reflection of the reality reality that we live in. So if carnage and destruction is the reality of the West, art will reflect that. Maybe are you thinking in the 1600s, and let's say the 1100s through the 1600s or the 1700s, when this art that we're speaking of was created, destruction and death wasn't the reality as much because we're living longer now. We have more stuff. How is our reality more bleak? Or maybe I'm misunderstanding your argument a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely not that, because they, as you said, had like half the life expectancy that we have, or less than half that we have today. And like you said, the 1100s, that's smack dab in the middle of the Black Plague,
right?
Where, a million times worse than the coronavirus.
Right.
Basically, even worse than the Spanish plague.
Right, yeah. A plague is where basically half of who you know dies.
Mm-hmm.
A third to a half die.
Yeah, they're crazy stories. I remember learning about one monk in Ireland, I think it was, where his entire monastery was wiped out, and all the villages in the surrounding area were wiped out, and he literally just wandered around the countryside, and he legitimately thought he was the last person left on earth, which is just wild to me, until he eventually found somebody.
Yeah, that's a plague.
Yeah.
This little COVID stuff, that's part of the reason why I was so frustrated the church is closing, is because they didn't close when an actual plague happened. And now we don't need to open up. That's another podcast.
Where was I going with this? Oh, yes. So, yeah, the short answer, that's not the case. They definitely had death present before them. And you can see it in the art and imagery from that age, where there's so many like depictions of, the like Grim Reaper or whatever, the skeleton coming in and to collect you at your deathbed. And then Final Judgment Day depictions were very common. So they definitely had death at on their minds, and they knew that it was a reality. But I think that they had a very eternal perspective, very supernatural perspective, so that death wasn't seen as the end. It's seen as a passageway, really, because when you look at, I think as a student, when I looked at this art of that's like a skeleton in a hood coming to collect someone at death, like, to me that looks completely disturbing. But I think that probably if you were a person in the Middle Ages, that would be seen kind of differently. Not necessarily as like, good times and smiles and laughs, but in a less depressing light, I think is what they would have seen it in. They would have seen it as more, this is a reality, and this is something that I prepare for, and it's not something that's morbid or depressing because it's more present to me. But I think, go ahead.
So is your argument that as a culture, the West latched onto the idea that the earth is all we have. This is all we have. And when all we had was torn apart by world wars and death and destruction, that was permanently scarring to the art that we created.
Right. I think it's not really, I don't think it was like one big collapse, but it was just little subversions throughout the ages. I think, like I said, the Enlightenment was one big part. When obviously the Enlightenment wasn't all bad, but the idea that God is no longer put at the center of your worldview.
We're burning the churches.
Right. Once you get that, then you have, when something like World War I happens, your society is less capable of bouncing back and rebuilding. And I think that obviously they did. A lot of good things have happened since World War I, but a lot of bad things as well. And I think step by step, as the decades have gone on since then, you've really seen a lot of bad things.
Yeah, well, that leads us to the question, though, what happened with the church in particular? Like, that's my, like, the church doesn't change its universal teaching, right? I mean, the church doesn't change the dogma. So the church never changed this earth, that never changed the dogma that this earth is not all we have. We have more than this earth. We have heaven. We have Christ at the center. And yet, the art of our churches, the art of the church buildings itself, the sacred music that is heard in the church, what happened with that then? That's kind of where I'm leading, or I'm trying to figure out, us Catholic artists, what happened to the great heritage that we had?
I mean, you can still find it. It's less common. What do you mean exactly? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Just thinking about the church that I went to this morning. How did this happen? This is not some poor missionary outpost. This is a very rich side of town with a lot of money. Why is it that this is the best that we've got? What happened to that idea? And then why can we not make great films? Why are not the Catholic filmmakers the best filmmakers? I guess Mel Gibson is an interesting case, but why is it that our stories are so limited to, limited release on film or on tiny little movie theaters that no one ever sees? What has happened to this great tradition is where I'm getting at. And when I try to answer that question, I think about there's two sides of I think about how on a spectrum between order and art, conservative and art, where conservative would be the very high ordered, very much if you want to execute a plan, you execute it. This is taking a little bit out of Jordan Peterson's book. And on the other side of the spectrum is the creative, the artistic side, the chaotic side, the side that is going to try to step out into the unknown and build that second tower that doesn't know how it's going to be built, but they'll find a way to build it, as in the case with Chartres. Now, obviously, you need both people. But what happens when in church teaching, which happened in the 60s, people start saying that which is self-destructive to your thought? So, for example, Jesus didn't create something that was taught quite a bit starting in the 60s is Jesus didn't multiply the bread and loaves. It was people sharing. Well, that's destructive to the idea that this Savior creates a sign and he is capable of saving and multiplying the loaves. It's a self-destructive thought. So if you start saying that which one side of the people will, because they're very conservative, disregard it, throw it away. And you say, that's not true. And they stay in the church. And the other side, which is very open, which is part of the trademark creativity, like Peterson says, if that side that's very open listens to what you're saying because they're trying to hear your story, if it's coming from the same source as the authorities in the church, they have no reason to stay. By telling these liberal ideas, these anti-orthodox ideas that are being spread in the church, you chase off those artists that might find a home within the church because it's self-destructive. Their artists are not stupid. It's self-destructive to the dogma. The only people you keep within the church are those conservatives that are not inclined to listen to your story to begin with. And so within the church, you no longer have those elements that drive you to create these things. You only have those elements which will not listen to the self-destructive thought. So I think what we're looking at is an interesting case of where the church, by its teaching, is destroying its capacity to create great art. Which leaves me to great hope because the seminaries don't teach that sort of thing anymore. You don't hear it as much from the pulpit from the young priest. You hear it from the old ones still. I think there's hope in the fact that church teaching is returning to its orthodox ideas.
So yeah, basically, I think what I understood you to be saying was that your ideas in the philosophy and the theology that you teach, the ideas that you convey to your people is what shapes their worldview. And if you're teaching watered down theology and philosophy and so on, you're inhibiting, you're directly going against what leads to the creation of great cathedrals like Chartres and things like that.
Yeah, you're destroying your capacity to do it. All you have left is mercenaries that you can hire who are not going to build Chartres for you. Never going to happen. And I agree with what you said about art in general. where we've inhaled these ideas that prevent us from experiencing the beautiful, let alone creating the beautiful. That in general has happened post-Enlightenment, starting in Enlightenment and then post-Enlightenment. But in particular, like very narrowly within the church, if you're going to ever be relevant again, you have to be brave enough to be politically incorrect, to teach the timeless dogma of the church. That will strengthen you and allow you to actually create again. But I'm afraid we're way beyond what our normal time is. I'm sorry.
It happens.
In any case, we're going to leave it there. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast. I'm JP.
And I'm Peter. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We are Catholic filmmakers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art. Check out some of our work. The Extrovert. Just Google The Extrovert movie. It'll pop right up. It's a film that we made together. Peter's The Unfollowed. Check it out on Amazon. Unfollowed. Mm-hmm. The Unfollowed by Peter Pinedo. And hopefully you will enjoy some of the work that we've done. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.